Hello. So I thought for today's video I could do a winter try-on haul, but obviously this is a California, specifically Southern California winter try-on haul. I realize that this is very atypical for most people to be wearing just a very lightweight sweater and have that making up your wardrobe for winter, but such is the reality that I live in. It was made very abundantly clear to me that I do not own appropriate winter clothing when visiting my cousins that live in Anchorage, Alaska. That reality hit me quite hard in the form of frostbite. Anyways, that's a different story. But so we're gonna do a little California winter try-on haul. So this sweater, I wanted to get just like a plain, just lightweight. I like that, it has this cool like cutouts in it. Wore white so you'd be able to see that feature. So this is by this brand called Reformation, and just thought it had this sort of vintagey quality to it, which is something that I often look for in clothing. Definitely like things that have a vintage sort of feel to them. Maybe that takes me back to my youth when I pretty much predominantly shopped in vintage stores and in thrift stores. That was my high school attire. But I just like those. I feel like this will be like one of those pieces that you can just wear with everything. Do some little heel sounds from time to time. And I thought we could just kind of have a soft-spoken chit-chat, check up with each other. I hope that you are doing well. I hope that all is well in your world. I hope that you can take this time right now just to, kind of like center yourself, take a few deep breaths. Everything can wait. Take all those thoughts that are inside your head and just tell yourself you're just going to set them aside for a little bit. Give yourself a moment to just completely forget everything and enter this little relaxing world of scratching fabric sounds and weird psychological and philosophical musings of me. All right, so here's the first output. I'm gonna now, and I have, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shirts total that I thought we could try on together. So if you have not seen the documentary, The Age of Disclosure, I definitely highly recommend checking that out if you're into aliens, and even if you're not into aliens, because it definitely seems like there's some mysterious things going on that are being covered up. That being said, I think a lot of people sort of misunderstand the nature of not disclosing really sensitive information to the public. I think a lot of people will think that hey, the government's doing something sort of nefarious by not disclosing everything. But it's, we live in a world where nothing can be told in secret. It's not like our government can say hey guys, don't let the rest been discovered, and we have this incredible technology that we've discovered from some of these crash sites that really pushes the boundaries of anything we ever thought was possible. You know, because what is leaked to, you know, the people of our country and the countries that are our allies, you know, will also be disclosed to people that are, you know, perhaps not our allies. And so that's just something you have to take into consideration. Like, once a secret is out, that secret's not just revealed to the people that you want to have the information. So, like, I'm just saying, let's just give the government sort of like the benefit of the doubt, which is not something I thought I would ever say, but let's do it, because you have to take into consideration that what they're withholding may not be something they're withholding from you personally. Most likely they're not withholding it from you personally. But what is withheld from one, you know, is withheld from everyone, essentially. But it's an interesting documentary, because it's not just like, you know, people. I'm going to change into the next outfit. What I was saying before I changed tops was, what's interesting about this particular documentary is it's not, you know, like backwoods people talking about being abducted. You know, you have people like Mark Rubio and Chuck Schumer, you know, people that you would not expect to be talking about aliens, discussing aliens. It's, you know, everybody that's in this documentary are people that were either, like, you know, in the CIA or in the Air Force, people that had really top standing high government officials. So that makes it interesting. And nothing's really disclosed in the documentary other than the fact that, hey, there is information. We're not telling you any of it, but there is information. But it kind of sent me, I must say, on a bit of a deep dive. I would tell you where I got this shirt if you had any interest, but I have no idea, because I purchased this off of Instagram, which is where I get, I would say, probably 95% of the things I purchase, because I'm someone that really enjoys fashion, but I'm also someone that absolutely detests, with a capital D, detests the experience of shopping and going into stores. So I would say virtually everything I own has been suggested to me by my algorithm. God bless that algorithm, because it sends some cute things my way. But anyways, yeah, I don't know where this came from. But what I was going to say is that I started to do a little bit of a deep dive after watching this documentary, because it was implied that these visits from, you know, alien life, that they started to appear and take interest in us once we started developing, like, atomic power, weapons of mass destruction, which I thought was interesting. And I thought it was a really interesting quote that someone said, because they were talking about, like, you know, say you know, for example, that there's ants in your backyard, there's lots of little ants crawling around in your backyard. You're kind of indifferent to them until those ants start making their way into your house. And that's when you're like, okay, these ants need to be dealt with. Because it sort of seems as though we have developed these capabilities that have ramifications that exceed our own personal level of awareness. So say we drop a bomb like Hiroshima or Nagasaki, these are both occurring like around 1945. And at that time, the ramifications of dropping these bombs reached beyond, just our universe, and the effects traveled out into, perhaps other galaxies that we are unaware of, that suddenly we're like, we need to keep a closer eye on these ants. And that's when, right around that time period, 1945, after those incidents occurred, we start seeing this sort of like influx of sightings. All right, regretfully, I have to put a new shirt on. I say regretfully, not because this shirt is so great, but because I'm kind of lazy and it's kind of a pain in the ass to keep changing these shirts. Not to mention like the mess that it sort of creates. Every time I do a try on haul, it looks like a bomb went off in my hands. All right, I'll be right back. New shirt. You can't go wrong. Can't go wrong with just a nice, plain, black cotton shirt with a nice scooped neckline. That's what I say. So anyways, I started to do a deep dive on this. And what also struck me as interesting, beyond the fact that the sightings appeared when the bombs were dropped, and we sort of like made not our presence known, but I should say we made our shortcomings and our ignorance known, that certain forces felt that they needed to step in. But what I also find very, very interesting, I don't know if you are familiar with either the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Library of Nag Hammadi. I'll tell you a little bit about both, but they were both discovered at the exact same time. The Library of Nag Hammadi was discovered in the exact same year, and the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered like 2 or 3 years before those bombs were dropped. That just seems like a little bit more than just a mere coincidence. So, the Library of Nag Hammadi is all of these super ancient texts, like the Gospel of Thomas and whatnot, that an Egyptian farmer, his first name was Muhammad, I can't remember his last name, he was digging for fertilizer in the desert, and his shovel hit something, which he later discovered to be a clay jar, okay? And then he brings this clay jar back to his house, and they open this jar, and inside this jar are 13 bound books known as the Library of Nag Hammadi. And inside these books are these very ancient gospels and writings that have been buried for like roughly 2,000 years. What they contain, I will let you discover on your own, but contains some interesting things. But you have to wonder if the forces that knew that information, was not ready to be unearthed suddenly allowed those books to be found in the exact same year that these sightings started occurring and that the bombs were dropped. It just seems a little bit like too many interesting coincidences here. And then I'm sure, you're aware of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So those were found in caves, I believe, like around 1947. I'm not 100% sure on that date, but like basically around that time frame. And it's just sort of interesting that all of this knowledge that I believe is sort of essential for humanity to read, everything's sort of like becoming discovered around the exact same time period. Which leads me to my final sort of truth that I want to share in this video. And that is that I hate ChatGTP. So ChatGTP and I recently had a falling out, you could say. We're no longer friends. We're no longer on speaking terms. I mean, I might use it to like look up something strictly factual, but I certainly do not ever want to read any of its commentary again. And I'll tell you why. I guess not before I change shirts, because I'm trying to keep, like visually engaged in this, as well as like maybe making you think, or who knows, maybe you're just thinking I'm insane, which is quite possibly true. Alright, so here's this shirt. I know where it came from. This shirt came from a place called Free People. So what I was gonna say is, we live in an age where people are becoming increasingly not only dependent upon AI, but we are treating it as though it were a god and as though it is an advanced form of life, which is not the case. So what needs to be remembered is that human beings, the ones that created these machines, we see less than 1% of the entire visible light spectrum, less than 1%. We hear less than 1% of all the different frequency ranges. Our senses, our perceptions, our capacity to see reality is incredibly limited. And we are the people that built these machines. These machines are limited to what is known by human beings and the limits of our knowledge of science that exists at this point in time. Quantum computers are a far more efficient version of ChatGTP, and they may help scientists make dramatic leaps in discoveries. However, all of that information is still been programmed by human beings, and it contains the consensus of all known, that's the key word, all known information that exists to mankind at this time. So what I'm trying to say is essentially, we recognize ourselves as at the very, very top of things. But for argument's sake, let's just say that cockroaches were able to invent their own version of ChatGTP. and all the cockroaches that exist on the entire planet were all able to get together and form a consensus of all known cockroach facts based on their even more limited grasp of reality, we would look at their version of that ChatGTP and we would laugh. Think, oh, bless their hearts, isn't that cute? You know? To say that we understand everything would be incredibly ignorant. And you have to remember, the most intelligent minds that ever existed in mankind, you know, talking about people like Einstein, the Greek philosophers, they all pointed to the same truth, which was the more they know, the more they realized they don't know. So if the smartest minds of our time, the smartest minds that ever existed, and I think we can agree, Einstein's definitely one of the top minds that ever existed. If he's coming to the conclusion that the more he knows, the more he realizes what he doesn't know, and his brain is forming like the top levels of these, you know, theories that we have about the known universe, we cannot look to AI as some sort of God that knows all. It's limited. And you need to remember that when you ask it questions and it gives you an answer as though that answer is a fact. It's not a fact. It's just what's known at this time. Mankind is always going to be limited to what advancements are our own personal limits at that point in time. You know, if ChatGTP existed in 1405, you know, the facts that it would claim and state at that point would have obviously no knowledge of anything that had to do with the quantum world. And so the fight that I got into with ChatGTP was the fact that labeling what is known is very different from recognizing the totality of what is unknown and factoring that into the equation. I know this video is kind of weird, but you know, so like when I make ASMR, because a lot of people will watch my videos and they'll be like, this is not ASMR. But I can only really create like what for me is relaxing. So for me personally, I find like tapping and those types of videos just to be sort of irritating. So for me personally, you know, I experienced my own version of ASMR while I was in school, listening to like the teacher lecture. That's what made me feel relaxed. That's what helped my brain to escape reality. My brain couldn't escape reality just by someone tapping on something. I needed someone to engage me mentally in order to escape my own thinking. And I realized that everyone is different, and if this is not your version of ASMR, by all means, you're entitled to that opinion. Not everyone likes the same music, not everyone likes the same food, but I can only make the type of content that I know helped me to get out of my own head, if that makes sense. All right, we're getting down to the last two shirts. This shirt is also from Free People, if you are interested. It has like a lot of, I don't know if you can see on camera, but it's like very texturized. For this try-on haul, I thought I would wear clothing that's like a little bit more what I would authentically wear if I was going out somewhere nice. Like, this is me dressed up. Like, I don't want to say like this is what I look like typically, because I would say typically like I'm not even this level of dressed up. This would be my version of like, okay, I'm dressed up to go out to dinner. I think in a lot of videos I wear a style of clothing that I'm wearing specifically for, you know, the character of that video. And I think a lot of people think that like that's how I actually dress in real life. This would be me getting very dressed up, and 95% of the time it's way below this. Way, way lower than this. I don't get this level of ready to like go to the market and the gym and whatever. Anyways, I just kind of wanted to let that be known. Because, I don't know. I just felt like sharing. Anyways, so, yeah, I was just kind of wanted to just put that reminder out there that while science can label and identify certain things, that is very different than understanding them. You know, for example, like when I was in college, I majored in psychology, and I'm sure they've made advancements since I was in college, but at the time, what really hit me, what sort of turned me off to it was they're great at labeling. Psychology is great at labeling. It's great at identifying, oh, you have this, that, and the other thing. What they are not good at, what they have not mastered, curing and understanding, which you would hope would be more at the forefront. Identifying is really not all that helpful if you don't know how to treat. And I'm sure some people will disagree with me. And to those people, I have to say, look at the world. There are more mental health issues than ever. Does this look like a world that's been treated and cured? I think not. All right, anyways. But I just think we always have to be very aware. Very, very aware of the fact that science likes to speak as though it knows the facts when it is only aware of a small sliver of the pie, and to not let institutions, governments, anything convince you that they know the ultimate truth, especially AI. But that the only place you will ever really find like the ultimate truth is through looking inwardly at your own heart, through your own mind, through your own consciousness, through your own awareness. It's sharper and more precise than any science. You know, there's all these, I like watching like those nature documentaries. They're really fascinating. And you can kind of like understand what I'm talking about by this example. So lots of times when you watch those nature documentaries, whether it's like on insects or it's on birds or, you know, any creature, at some point they'll start pointing out these like mating behaviors or these traits that animals possess, that they innately, meaning they weren't taught to them, they just know them, that they innately know without ever being taught. And they have termed these things instincts. And they think as though calling something an instinct, that eliminates the need to go further into that. Labeling something an instinct in no way, shape, or form explains how this information is known by animals and insects. The fact that creatures the size of ants and bees are able to have very complex, elaborate, systems built into their consciousness, their awareness, that were never taught to them. Science does not understand that, And so they'll just say, oh, that's their instinct, but you have to realize things that are labeled are not explained, they're just named. And there's so many limitations to what is known, so many limitations to what is known. And we just have to be very, very careful now that AI has come into the picture, because AI is going to want people to think that the totality is known. But the totality will never be known by AI. The totality will never be known by something that does not possess consciousness. You cannot program true consciousness, and that is something that you possess that AI will never have. AI will never have a gut reaction to something. AI will never feel a vibe. AI will never sense when someone has like a bad intention towards you. For so long, I'm sure all of us have always heard the phrase, the body is a temple. And for so long, I misunderstood that. For so long, I thought that meant that you needed to treat your body really well in terms of like the food that you put into it, and you want to work out, and you want to take good care of this physical shell. And that's all still true. However, I realize now that's not what that meant at all. I realize now that what that means is that the true truth, the ultimate truth, is only found inside you. And your body is the temple. Your body is this finely tuned machine that, if you allow it, will help to guide you to your own personal truth, which will be the universal truth. And it's really important to recognize the difference between identity and your soul, your consciousness, your awareness that existed before you were born and that will exist after you die. Your identity, your ego, it's going to fight very, very hard to relinquish control. Your ego wants you to believe that that is the truest version of you, but you know how you know it's not the truest version of you? There's one thing that makes it very, very clear that the ego is not the truest version of you. And this is the answer. Because anything that ego tells you that you want, whether that's the perfect girlfriend or boyfriend, whether that's a specific car, a specific house, a material object, when you gain that thing, it will never satisfy you. And that's why so many people end up going from like relationship to relationship and, material possession to next material possession, because your ego has convinced you to drink from the wrong well. And there's only one well that's ever going to truly, truly quench your thirst. And that well will never be something that's outside of you, and it'll never be something that could be taken away from you. That's a distinction to know if it's something that you truly, your soul is seeking, or if your ego is seeking. If the item can be taken from you, that's not something your soul is seeking. That's something your ego is seeking. Now, I don't want to act like I am at this place where I no longer have an ego. I do. I very much still have an ego. But I'm trying to loosen its grip. I look at my YouTube analytics, so I see the age of people that watch my videos. It's people that are younger than me. I'm someone that's journaled my entire life from elementary school all the way through college. So what I'm trying to say is I have a written record of the fact that I was a complete idiot for decades. All right? I know that I went through a really, really extraordinarily long phase of being a fool. So I want to make that really abundantly clear. I've only very, very super recently, and I'm talking about months, not years, like in the last 9 months, have I started to sort of like embark on this spiritual journey where I've begun meditating every single day. And it's really transformed me. And if you're someone that struggles with anxiety, and I'm someone that struggled with anxiety for a really, really long time, it had a really strong grip on me. It had a really strong hold on me. I really was living from a place of fear. I was really living from a place of trying to control the narrative. And it wasn't until a series of really unfortunate events, just one after another, just kind of kept hitting me, that at a certain point, I just fully surrendered. And it was such a liberating feeling to stop trying to control. And I just would love to pass on to anyone that's like younger than me watching this, because like I was saying, I wasted all of my teens, I wasted all of my 20s trying to control that which I was never meant to control. And I realized that this is a lesson that kind of has to be learned by lived experience, not really by somebody telling it to you. But I hope on some level, like, it's processed, even if it's not lived at this point, and at some point you remember it later on when you're having a series of events that test you. That even in the worst circumstances, you can find a place within yourself that is untouched and is completely calm. And I know that sounds crazy, but it does exist. And it doesn't come in the form of a pill. And it doesn't really come in the form of any technique other than simply looking within your own heart. And I can't really explain how to do that because I think that's different for everybody, but I would just want to invite you, if you are someone that has a lot of difficulty with trust, and I am not talking about trust of other people, but trust of life, that you mistrust life, that you are constantly trying to control every moving part, that you just look into yourself, whether it's those first 15 minutes when you first wake up, or those, last 15 minutes before you go to bed, and you start to make that like a sacred ritual with yourself, where you're trying to learn who you truly are before, like, the world made you forget, and try to find that version of yourself again. Because it is in there. And you're not going to find it immediately. Like, I'm just beginning to sort of like peel the layers of this onion off, But I peeled one layer off, enough to realize that if I keep digging, there is something very remarkable buried within. And I just wanted to invite you to contemplate that. And on that note, I will see you